Good morning, officially good morning and welcome to Digital Citizenship Day, everyone. We are very happy to have you. We have quite a few friends joining us live in Zoom, and to those of us that are watching on YouTube Live or a little bit later, good morning to you as well. So just a reminder to everyone in the meeting, if you do have any questions, you can just type them right in the chat. I will be So we can all take some time in our lives to ensure that we treat all people with respect and dignity, online and offline. I'm hoping that today's event will inspire the youth participating to take action in their own lives. Treat all people with respect. Now, when I say youth participating, we have tons of youth participating today. We've got schools joining from across Canada and around the world. So I would like to say thank you to all of you for taking the time to learn about this topic and to join us today. Before I introduce our speakers, I would like to acknowledge CC UNESCO. So we're joined today by our partners at the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. CC UNESCO helps Canadians share knowledge locally and globally in order to create better societies and build peace in the minds of all people. To do so, the Commission facilitates cooperation in the fields of education, science, culture, communication, and information to address some of the most complex challenges facing our world today. So this project would not be possible without our partnership with CC UNESCO. So I would like to thank you very much for making it possible and to make it possible to have this platform for our wonderful speakers. So first I'm going to welcome our youth perspective speakers. So we do have two speakers that are going to be joining us today. I thought it would be great to start with a youth because we are talking to youth about joining online. Raisa has been working with us in our Youth Advocacy Council, and she's very opinionated and excited about this topic. So I asked her if she would prepare a little presentation for us today, so I'm going to welcome her first. So Raisa Hawk is a 15-year-old student in grade 10 at Collège Jean Sauvé in Winnipeg, Manitoba. She likes to try new things and takes part in many clubs and activities in her school, including the Japanese Club, the Journalism Club, the Gardening Club, UNESCO, and many others. She really tries to be an all-rounder. So I would like to say welcome and good morning to Raisa, and I will pass it over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Raisa. I go by she, her pronouns, and I love learning new things, like you've mentioned before. The internet is a haven of information, and there are many things we can learn on it these days. You can obtain many things from the internet, including knowledge and entertainment. I find digital citizenship important for the youth to learn about, since it teaches them to be respectful to themselves as well as others in a digital environment. When learning about digital citizenship, the youth are taught to participate safely, critically, effectively, and responsibly on the internet and social networking sites, while also learning how to deal with cyberbullying, sexting, and more dangers found in the digital world. I think it is important for us to understand how much of an impact we have on media as it has on us. We regularly use the internet. It is a huge tool, but we are subtly impacted by the contents on the internet, which, when constantly portrayed, can build up and become our actual beliefs. Hate, And discrimination can be found in media in different forms. It can be clear and easy to spot, but can also be subtle and hard to decipher. The worst I have experienced in digital media is receiving insults about my skills in games. Sad. I didn't take those insults too seriously, but I am aware of the impacts this could have on other people. What seems like nothing to me could have a huge impact on somebody else. There are people in my life whom I know would get into a heated argument with others and would feel way more impacted by those insults than me. It can hurt people's feelings. Just like when we play sports. When someone messes up, if their teammates were to glare or make fun of them, the player would get more anxious and continue to perform badly. Positive and constructive feedback can help others more than insults. But in the end, we can't control how others act. The least we can do is leave a more positive footprint on the internet than a negative one. It is important to talk about media as a youth, since we frequently use digital media. In this time and era, media plays a huge role in our lives. And while we can learn things from the internet, there are many forms of hate, discrimination, prejudice, and stereotyping embedded in different media that we don't always perceive at first glance. While safety online and knowing how to deal with cyberbullying are important, things like stereotypes that are integrated into media aren't always discussed as much. There are many forms of hate, and stereotypes online can be hard to discover. It is often due to the fact that they are shown so much that people have actually started to believe them. When people don't understand something, in order to understand, we usually try to fill in the blanks ourselves. Stereotypes are used in some games in this manner. When a character doesn't have background information, but looks and acts a certain way, we fill in the blanks with our own conclusions, using the knowledge and the stereotypes we know, which can lead to misunderstandings in real life. Stereotypes can lead to prejudice, which can lead to discrimination, which is a form of hate. I think it is important for the youth to be more aware of how different media influences us and the different negative aspects there are. Instead of just scrolling mindlessly, yeah, I know some of you do that, we should properly think about what we are seeing. As media evolves and we continue to use different forms of media, there will be more subtle forms of hate. By being aware and reflecting on what we perceive, we can be less affected by the negativity in media and make better decisions about our opinions and views in reality. I hope you'll learn something new from this event or gain a new perspective on media. It's more than misiyat. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Raisa. I would just like to say personally, for me, it is very inspiring to see a youth that feels this strongly about this topic. So I would just like to thank you again very much for sharing that as a good, exciting little intro to our event today. I would like to welcome next our main presenter, Matthew Johnson. So Matthew is the Director of Education for MediaSmarts, Canada's Centre for Digital Media Literacy. He is the architect of Access, Use, Understand, Create Digital Media Literacy Framework for Canadian K-12 schools, and the author of many of MediaSmart's parent, youth, and classroom resources, including Break the Fake, which returned the beloved House Hippo to the Canadian screens. He is a member of the Canadian Pediatric Society's Digital Health Task Force and has served on expert panels convened in the Sex Information and Education Council of Canada and the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario's Strategic Priorities Advisory Committee. So I would like to welcome you, Matthew. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. I will go ahead and stop sharing and pass the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Risa, for getting us off to such a great start. So just before I start, let me mention for the teachers who are tuning in that the activity that we're going to be doing today is an adaptation of one of the many, many lessons on digital citizenship and media literacy that's on our website, MediaSmarts.ca, and those are available for free download in English and French to anyone, anywhere in the world. And they cover everything from online hate, which we're talking about today, to things like online privacy, cyberbullying, or stereotyping and representation, and some of the other things that Risa mentioned. So I'm now going to start sharing my screen, and I just want to confirm that people
Looks
are
great.
seeing it. All right.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. In this workshop, we're going to talk about some of the ways that we can recognize hate content when it's cloaked as reasonable argument or debate. But first, let's talk about Oumuamua. Oumuamua is a finger-shaped object that is passing through our solar system. Some astronomers think it was made by aliens. It might be a spaceship or a part of a broken one. Here's why they think that. It has an unusual shape. It took a path that can't be explained just with gravity. It sped up as it moved, which asteroids don't do. It moved like a comet, but without a comet tail. It moved faster than any space object ever recorded. And it got 10 times brighter when it rotated. So what do you think? Having heard all of these things about Oumuamua, does it seem convincing that it might be a spaceship? Well, here's some more information about it. First of all, many asteroids and even moons have unusual shapes, and not all comets have tails. There are many possible explanations for why it might have sped up or had an unusual orbit. Smooth rocks can be 10 times more reflective than rough ones, so just its smoothness could explain why it's so bright. Almost no astronomers believe that it is a spaceship or that it was made by aliens. And the main astronomer who says it was is part of a project promoting interstellar spaceships. So now what do you think? Have you changed your opinion? Does it seem less likely? And do you think the slide before this one gave you a fair and honest view of the evidence? Well, it was an example of what we call dishonest arguments. A dishonest argument can be very convincing because it lies with the truth. All of the points on that first slide were true, but because of the way they were presented and because other facts were left out, they gave a distorted idea of how strong the argument was. So just seeing those, you would have been absolutely reasonable to think that it was probably some kind of alien spaceship. But when you knew all the facts and when you understood who might want you to believe that, you could see the evidence was against it. Now, there are three main kinds of dishonest arguments. There are ones that are dishonest about the facts. So for instance, including only the facts that support the idea that Oumuamua was an alien spaceship and not the ones that give other explanations is what we call a cherry-picking argument. There are also arguments that are dishonest about the issue that's being discussed. Even if there are things about Oumuamua that are hard to explain, those aren't by themselves evidence that it was made by aliens. As well, only a small number of astronomers think it might be an alien spaceship. The consensus among astronomers is that it isn't. These are two different examples of what we call the fake doubt argument. And finally, there are arguments that are dishonest about the arguer, about the person making the argument. The fact that the main author who was arguing Oumuamua isn't natural is involved in part of a project pushing to build interstellar spaceships shows that he has reasons to want people to believe it was made by aliens and that he isn't just asking questions. The fact that someone has a reason to support one side or another of an issue doesn't automatically disqualify them, but if they hide that from you, it's a bad sign, and you do need to take their motivation into consideration. As I already mentioned, One of the most common dishonest about the facts arguments is what we call cherry picking. That's giving only the facts that support one side of the argument and leaving out the others. For example, if an ad says that a cereal has a dozen vitamins and minerals, what might it be leaving out? You can throw possible answers into the chat. Yeah, so we're getting great answers, and that's exactly right. It may have a dozen vitamins and minerals, but what they're not mentioning is that it might have all kinds of sugar or other things, calories, the serving size, how much do you have to eat to get those vitamins and minerals? How many calories are there? What's the actual amount? So they're choosing only the information that makes them look good and not the information that maybe that gives you a fuller picture. The iceberg argument is excusing a lack of evidence by saying that what has been recorded suggests there must be much more that has not been recorded. So here's an example. 5 restaurant workers were caught not washing their hands this year. When you add all the ones they didn't catch, we can see this is a big problem. So this is an example of the iceberg argument. What's wrong with this statement?
I think maybe this is a bit of a trickier question. Mm-hmm.
So we have here in this statement one bit of actual evidence. 5 restaurant workers were caught not washing their hands this year. Well, maybe that's not a very big number in a whole city. So they add on, when you add all the ones they didn't catch, we can see this is a big problem. But if you have to add data that you don't have to make it seem like a big problem, it's probably not a big problem. Of course, some things really are underreported. But if you don't have a good reason to believe that something is being underreported, you have to assume that the numbers that you have are accurate. So in this case, there's no good reason to think there are a whole lot more people not washing their hands that aren't being caught. We see the naming framing argument a lot in political debates. That's using a name or a term that requires the other person to accept your point of view or interpretation of the issue. It's also used to get people to Google words or phrases that will be more likely to support your side. So suppose someone says, we need to do something about raccoons. If you don't believe me, Google trash panda and garbage can. Why might it be a bad idea to get information by Googling these terms?
You know, while they're chatting about this one amongst themselves, this brings me back to Isabel's original argument. I feel like this one is also very common when it comes to politics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of politics is about naming and framing, trying to get people to use your terms and your way of interpreting an issue. So why might we not want to Google the words trash panda and garbage can to find accurate information about this issue?
Oh, I don't know if we know this one.
All right. Well, so first of all, take think a little bit about what you're going to get with the word trash panda or the phrase trash panda instead of raccoon. That's framing the issue in a negative way. By using the phrase trash panda, you're automatically going to get most of results from people who don't like raccoons. It's not a nice way of describing a raccoon. And if you add the phrase garbage can, you'll only get hits that are about raccoons getting into garbage. So you're going to get disproportionate results. It's going to make it seem like that's a much bigger issue than it actually is. That's why it's a bad idea to use the exact search terms anyone gives you. So sometimes people will say, they'll make a claim and they'll say, if you don't believe me, Google this. Instead, use the most neutral words you can. Never Google exact search terms someone gives you. So in this case, our most neutral terms would be raccoons and garbage. And that's going to give us much more accurate information. And it's framing it in a more neutral way. We're not assuming from the beginning that it is a problem. Another kind of dishonest argument is those that misrepresent what the issue is. One of the most common of these is what we call the fake doubt argument. That's pretending that there isn't a consensus on the topic when there is. Now remember, a consensus means a theory that most experts in a field agree is most likely correct, that the most of the evidence supports. So here's an example. Whether or not the town of Flin Flon exists is still under debate. After all, not every map has Flin Flon on it. How's this an example of the fake doubt argument?
Also, while they're thinking of this one, just this one reminds me of the climate debate that people often use. That's what immediately comes to my head when you showed this one.
Well, we always like to start out with examples that people don't have strong feelings about already. And in my experience, not many people have strong feelings about Flin Flon, except maybe people who live there. All right, we got one possible response. So that it is an example of false doubt because it's saying that it's suggesting Flin Flon may or may not be real. And if you live in Canada, you know it probably is. But what's wrong with this argument? Okay. When you say not every map has it, you're making the premise that it already exists. Well, it's kind of the opposite, where you're suggesting that the fact that not every map has it is evidence that it doesn't exist. But what might be some other reasons why not every map might have Flin Flon on it? So if maybe you've never heard of Flin Flon before, there's a good reason for that. It's because there's only about 6,000 people in Flin Flon. So not every map is going to have a small town on it. A map of Canada or even a provincial map might not necessarily have quite a small place. So the fake doubt argument is taking one little bit of evidence, in this case, the fact that not every map has Flin Flon on it, and acting like that one little bit of evidence is equal to the consensus that Flin Flon is a real place. It's not on every map because it only has about 6,000 people. So of course there's a consensus that Flin Flon is a real place, and one little bit of evidence doesn't counter that whole consensus. Now, sometimes there really isn't a consensus, but if there is a consensus in science, in history, in any professional field, an argument that goes against it needs a lot of extra evidence to be convincing. So if you're making an argument that goes against an existing consensus, it needs to be better evidence. It needs to be stronger evidence. So if you think someone might be using the fake doubt argument, we ask 3 questions. How many experts are there on each side? How many of those experts have relevant credentials? Remember that doctors, scientists, and other experts don't necessarily know more than the average person outside of their own topic, and even within subfields. So if you're getting information about vaccines, you want to make sure that the doctor who's giving it to you is actually an immunologist or an epidemiologist, not a cardiologist. Be suspicious when someone is used as an authority on a topic that they're not a real expert on. And of course, we want to know, does one side have a motive to make you think there's doubt when there isn't? The most famous example of this is how tobacco companies funded research for years on other possible causes of lung cancer to make it look like there was still doubt that smoking caused lung cancer. They weren't saying that smoking didn't cause lung cancer. Instead, they were trying to raise doubt by looking for other possible reasons. And by the way, this is a statue of Flint Abbey Floniton, who's a character from an old book which the town of Flin Flon was named after, and that is a fact. The fake doubt argument is acting like there are only two possible answers to a question. The fake choice argument is similar. This means acting like any evidence against the current consensus is automatically evidence for your argument. So here we see some maps say that Flin Flon is in Manitoba, but others say it's in Saskatchewan. That shows that it doesn't really exist. So why is that not evidence that Flin Flon isn't real? The fact that it's inconsistent which province it's in. So this argument is presenting us with a false choice. It's telling us that there are only two possibilities. Either Flin Flon is in one of these provinces, or it doesn't really exist. But actually, there are a lot of better explanations for why it's in different provinces on different maps. And the correct one is that it's actually in both provinces. The border between them actually runs through the middle of the town. So this is an example of a case where we want to make sure that there are often more than two possible answers. So just providing any evidence against the consensus isn't automatically evidence for your argument. One of the most common arguments that are dishonest about the issue is what we call a straw man. That's arguing against a position that the other side isn't really taking, or pretending that the key points in an issue are different than they really are. For example, why is this not a good argument in favor of letting raccoons vote in elections? Oh, I misspelled raccoon. So why does this not convince us that raccoons should be allowed to vote? So is this an argument that anyone is actually making against raccoons voting? Is this some argument that someone would really make? Of course not. Nobody would really say whether or not raccoons can hold a pencil is an important question in deciding whether or not they should be allowed to vote. There are many other good arguments to be made. So the straw man is making up a weak argument on the other side and attacking that instead of one of the other side's actual arguments. The last kind of dishonest arguments are the ones that are dishonest about the person making the argument. Here's an unusually honest example. Why might you not trust this review to be totally objective? If I say my brother's restaurant is the best in town, why might you be a little bit skeptical? Right, because they're related. Exactly. Of course, you're going to say your brother's restaurant is the best. Now, it might still be the best, but the fact that you are that's your brother means your opinion is worth a little bit less because it is biased. Now, usually in real life, we have to do a bit more digging, like searching for the name of a person or an organization to find out whether they have a stake in an issue. But this is one of the easiest dishonest arguments to make without realizing it, by being skeptical about something that doesn't affect you, but does affect other people, or For example, it's easy to question how bad racism is if you've never experienced it yourself. This argument, the persecuted genius, is a way of pretending that any evidence against your point, or the fact that your point is so wrong that people won't even engage with it, is proof that you're right. How's the example, the statement on the screen, an example of this? No one will publish my theory that Flin Flon was only put on maps as a message to aliens. They're afraid I'm getting too close. What's the weakness in this argument? So we might ask, what are some other reasons why that theory might not get published? Why might a newspaper choose not to publish a letter claiming that? Why might a scientific journal choose not to publish an article claiming that? Because it's obviously an absurd argument. And the fact that they're choosing not to publish it doesn't mean that they're suppressing it because it's the truth. It means they're choosing to not to publish it, and maybe it means other people are choosing not to engage with it, simply because it's not worth the consideration. People who use this argument take advantage of healthy skepticism to present their claims as things that they don't want you to know. This is sometimes called the Galileo gambit, because people who use it like to compare themselves to people like Galileo, who was imprisoned for publishing his theory that the Earth goes around the sun, which of course is true. We now know this is true, but it did go against the scientific consensus at the time, so people compare themselves to him to support their theories that go against today's scientific consensus. But the difference is that Galileo provided strong evidence that his theory was true, and in fact, other scientists did quickly accept it. It was religious authorities that objected. Now, scientific consensus is always changing, and there have been big changes in the consensus about things ranging from whether the continents move or stand still, to what causes stomach ulcers, to what killed the dinosaurs. So consensus does change, but it only changes when evidence against the consensus is stronger than evidence for it. The moving target argument is when you start with an extreme argument, then change to a more reasonable one and pretend that that's what you were saying all along. So here we see a conversation between A and B, and how is A moving the target in their audience, in their argument? All right, they twisted their intention, good. And yeah, they were dishonest. They're being dishonest about what their actual argument is. A here starts with an extreme argument that women shouldn't be firefighters. When B pushes back, A pretends they had made a different point, one that's hard to argue with. Now they can gradually sneak back to the more extreme point. If you're talking to a crowd, like in a video or on social media, using this kind of dishonest argument lets you reach people who are receptive to both messages. People who agree with the more extreme argument hear that, but those who don't listen to it hear the more moderate argument, and they still think that you're being reasonable. That's an example of how hate groups and movements, people who try to get you to fear and hate particular groups of people, use dishonest arguments. It's partially because they want to hide the real arguments that they're making, but it's also because those arguments don't make any sense, they're honest, and include all the facts.
If you'll just give me 1 second to collect myself.
Absolutely. No worries. Take your time.
But
Thanks.
okay. Get more sympathizers, the largest number. Ones that are more extreme to turn sympathizers into identifying members of their group or movement, and ones that give their true beliefs to turn members into activists who are willing to do violent or illegal things.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Help them move people up this pyramid because they can fool people into believing hateful.
Thanks for organizing this.
Because they can let a hate group seem more reasonable.
And if you'll give me one more second, sorry about this. As you can imagine, it's a busy time, so we're kind of back to back with a combination of meetings and final preparations and so forth. So I'm just, I have suddenly a little tsunami of stuff that's come into me, but I'll be off I'm now off and now just trying to get you guys on my screen. Okay, here we go. So let me start by just saying a few things off the top about sort of the COP more generally and the negotiations agenda, and I'll make it fairly short so that we can have an exchange. Are a lot of you guys going to the COP or good? Okay. Well, happy to see you there and happy to make time for you there as well. I know you've requested a meeting with Secretary Kerry, and we have put that to him, and I hope we'll be able to find a time for it.
Just to clarify,
for those of you who haven't been to a meeting like this before, it's a very large meeting. Basically, I sort of think of the COPs as having three dimensions. One is as an action forcing event. So because because governments and others have to show up, showing that they have, they've followed up with previous agreements and are doing their homework, it always is an opportunity to focus our efforts and also to use the meeting and preparations the months preceding it to try to push others to do things as well. The second is a venue to once showcase what we are doing, but also to bring people together to get more momentum, whether it's in the form of further initiatives or showing what more we can do in initiatives that happen already. The action agenda that we have and that many institutions outside of the formal government process have. Last year we agreed the race to zero, the race to resilience. The financial sector agreed on a large initiative, and there are just many sectoral kinds of initiatives that are going on. And by the way, I would say that this is a part of the Paris Agreement that when we negotiated it, we didn't really anticipate it would be so powerful. But the fact that so many institutions, sort of around the country and around the world who are not governments have really embraced the Paris temperature goal and the other goals, the aligning finance with low emission, climate resilient future, that has become a really powerful organizing principle for so many institutions. And so that is very much a feature of the COP. I think now there are efforts to try to hold the institutions that have made these kinds of commitments to account so that we know that they're following through just as we are being held to account, and that when we're following through, people know it. When we're not following through, people know it. And then the third component is the negotiations. And they will seem contentious often, and that is we have to work out differences, and obviously we have very different perspectives and needs and capabilities as governments. But I think it's fair to say that that over time the negotiations have been very successful at advancing consensus on ways to move forward in the climate process, which is not to say that they are perfect or that the outcomes are perfect or anywhere close to ideal. But I would say, they over time, they kind of represent the leading edge of political will in the world to tackle this issue. So that's the way we look at it. My role, and probably the role of most of the people who are on this call, is a bit double-hatted, because we focus very much on the action agenda, and we'll have an enormous number of activities that are occurring at the COP. There'll be a leaders session. We anticipate high-level participation. Secretary Kerry will be engaging in, several dozen leader-type initiatives, and those offer opportunities to make new announcements, and also to, make new political understandings and agreements among parties. But my main beat is the negotiations. So, how are we looking at Cairo? So it's going to be different from Glasgow for a couple of different reasons. First, we're largely through negotiating the kind of structure of the Paris Agreement, the Paris Agreement itself, and then the main rules that organize what we as governments will do over the coming decades. We had very important, outstanding pieces of the rule book that we had to finalize last year, and we largely did. So this is the first COP after we have a full structure for working over coming decades. And the Egyptians are calling it the implementation COP. We've kind of called it the implementation plus COP, because even though we have all agreed on the structure and we've agreed on things that we will do that we have to follow through on, they're not enough. So we need more ambition in terms of emission reductions in order to get on a track to keep 1.5 within reach. And that's a major priority for us, is to use this COP to really make sure that countries that have not aligned their NDCs with a reasonable trajectory toward net zero by mid-century, that they're doing so. And, we have particularly the couple of largest emerging country emitters who are not in that place yet. So, I think that will be a sort of backdrop to a lot of discussions that occur. In addition, we're not doing enough on finance. The administration has put forward bigger requests from Congress. There's actually an administration president's proposal for $11 billion sitting on the Hill now being considered. As you guys probably know, there's midterm elections, which probably will make depending on the outcome, that will have a big impact on the president's budget. We are working very hard to meet the goals that the donor group, the contributors set to meet the $100 billion. And I can tell you that Secretary Kerry spends an enormous amount of his time trying to secure funding. I actually spend a lot of time internally trying to secure funding, as do members of my team. Internally, we compete with other very worthy goals like food security and health, other development priorities. But the administration has worked very hard to make sure that climate is getting adequate attention, and that it's also being integrated into those other development priorities, so that we're getting as much climate action as we can with our existing foreign assistance portfolio. But as the president's budget indicates, we would like to see more. And, I think you will see us continue to make the case very vigorously that we should be getting more on the Hill. But in addition to that, we need alignment of a private sector finance, of the financial sector with the goals of the Paris Agreement, which is the agenda of trying to mobilize the trillions.
I do have to do a little bit of
And that's a big part of what Secretary Kerry spends his time doing, is
last questions for
finding additional areas where we can support
you have the
developing
option of either
countries
typing them in the chat,
and
or
where
if you'd
others
like,
will
there is
support
that option to
this
do a
effort
reaction.
as well.
So you can raise your hand.
Second
and I will
point,
call on
so
you.
that's
You're
the
welcome
implementation
to
plus
unmute and
agenda, and you'll
ask it,
hear
on
that
camera
discussion
as well.
happening
I do just
in a
have
lot
one
of
question that came through. I didn't
places.
want
It
to
shows
interrupt
up
you
in
while
the
you were talking,
negotiating
but
process,
now's a
but
good
maybe
opportunity to chat about it.
more in
Do you
the
have any
context
advice
of the
for
broader
engaging with people
themes
who
of the
use
COP
these
and
dishonest
the
arguments? So I know we
specifics,
had a lot of
although
content
it will
today, so
show
it's
up.
probably hard for us to give
Second point
this
is,
entire
Egypt
presentation
is
to
a
someone when we're
developing
having
country. They
a
are
debate with them. But do you have any advice
vulnerable.
for
They consider
engaging with
themselves to
people
be
who
an
use these?
Africa leader, so the
So
emphasis,
it can be
as you
really
know, is very
effective
much on
to point out when someone is
impacts,
using
not just in
one of these
Africa, but
arguments, to
also
point
in
out what's
other
wrong
vulnerable
with it.
countries.
Generally
and so we
speaking,
have
when you
given
see someone
a
sharing
lot of focus to
mis or
make sure that we
disinformation,
are
whether it's
meeting
something
that
that
part
they
of the
honestly
agenda.
believe is true and isn't, or
And
whether it's
one thing
something
I just
they're aware
highlight is that we'll
untrue,
be doing a high level
asking questions, correcting or debunking,
event with Egypt on adaptation in Africa, where we'll be giving focus on our increased emphasis on addressing climate impacts in the region. And I think that I believe that the date of that is the 10th, but that's one of our focuses. And then we've also we have been and are focusing very much on the vulnerability agenda in securing funding. We just had a meeting with the small island developing states from the Pacific, where we announced a bunch of new stuff on climate, and we've been sort of rolling out different things over the year that are designed to be more responsive to what is this climate crisis that we are dealing with. Then just to, the events in the real world will have an impact. I think the Russia-Ukraine situation is quite complicated, will complicate things in various areas. But I just say that, our view is, we need to keep our eye on the ball on climate. We have worked to try to make sure that the focus really is on addressing climate in all our relations with countries. And you probably seen news reports that Secretary Kerry and others in the administration have been saying, in particular with China, we see that we shouldn't be linking other geopolitical issues with the climate agenda. The climate agenda is too important, it's a global agenda, and we ought to be working together. Then, I think this substantial uptick in extreme weather events this year, will mean that there's an urgency to all of these issues, that personally I believe will only grow with every passing year. So that will focus efforts and certainly has focused our thinking on all of this. So in terms of the negotiations, I have just one other point to make. I mean, we are actually losing the opportunity to get to keep 1.5C within reach. So that is an event in the real world. We need more action from other countries. I think our view about our own actions is that the IRA and the Kigali Amendment, I think you've seen other things that we are rolling out. We've got our eye on the net zero ball very strongly, and we're just gonna continue to do that. But we have other countries whose emissions aren't set to peak for quite some time, who are quite large, and it's gonna be important to make sure that they too feel pressure to do things. On the negotiations, kind of three buckets, I would say. One is, sort of by acclamation, the things that Egypt and others have prioritized as kind of ministerial issues, and there I would say, particularly mitigation, adaptation, finance, and loss and damage. And within those, some specific things that we will be dealing with.
So
I'm
I would just
happy
like
to talk
to do
about
one more thank you to
some of those
everybody
things
that
in
joined
the
us, all of the
question
students
and answer.
that joined, and our wonderful presenters.
Then,
we can't do these events without
Then
you
there's
guys.
the
So
things that I would
thanks
characterize
again to
as,
everybody who made
the
it out today, and I hope
implementation
that you guys all
agenda,
enjoy
which
the
is
rest
not
of your day.
necessarily political, but where there are a lot of
Thank you. Yes,
very
thank you,
important
Megan, Risa.
things
Thank
on
you
the
very much for
agenda
coming.
that we and my negotiating
I hope
team
everybody took as many notes as I
deal
did.
with. And those range
you,
from
Grand Woodlands. It's
reporting
nice
and
to see you.
review to the adaptation.
Thank you.